Welcome back to the Missionary Disciple Podcast. My name is Andre and Angèle. This is my wife, Angèle. This week, our conversation is going to be about Rise Up, which is CCO's annual Christmas conference. And why we want to talk about it is because what we felt was that God spoke very clearly and placed a challenge before all those students, and I believe the whole church, is to go out and change the world, to build the city of God within the city of man. Ansha, maybe you could talk a little bit about what Rise Up is and how it's broken down and how the challenge kind of goes out to the students.
So Rise Up is our conference to gather all the CCO students across the country and really anybody from around the world that we've touched. And so 1,300 were gathered in Toronto this year. This is our biggest conference we've ever had. It's our 20th Rise Up. And it's an opportunity to grow that momentum and sense that, I'm not alone on this campus or in my parish trying to make evangelization things happen. There's a real sense of unity and momentum and not only getting fired up in the mission, but getting really ministered to in your own spirit and in your own walk with the Lord. So the flow of Rise Up is always very similar. There's different speakers every year, but we want to have just an opportunity for people to feel welcomed to the conference, because there's a lot of new people that will come, students that are just getting involved, and people who actually haven't had much experience with us. The second day, or the first full day, I should say, is a time of encounter with Jesus Christ and conversion, and ends with confessions and adoration. And then the next day is focused on the mission and helping people understand their missionary identity and how they're being sent out. And then there's practical sessions that happen on the December 31st, and then New Year's Eve, of course, which is awesome. And then there's just a release of all this energy out to the world on January 1st.
Yeah, and this Rise Up particularly, we felt as we were praying, we felt very strongly that, the Lord is inviting us to open ourselves up and to expand our gaze and our great expectation that He wanted to do something very special at this conference, but even more empower those participants to go out. And so all the talks were kind of directed towards encounter and then towards mission. But what I want to talk about is your address, actually, New Year's Eve, which I thought kind of captured it all and then really placed a real clear challenge to all those present there that night. But I believe everyone, that the task was right before our eyes, and it was clear what God was inviting us to do, and that was to build the city of God within the city of man. And we talk a little bit about that address, some important points that you made that night.
Well, I think what was central to what I addressed the people with was the words of St. John Paul II, because he's walked on the land that is Toronto. It was his last World Youth Day in Toronto, 2002. And so the words that he said on that land were important to me to try to speak out of. And I shared with the students his call to be saints, his call to be he makes a point of it's not a question of age to be a saint, it's a question of how filled you are with the Holy Spirit. And we really took time to give the Holy Spirit room at Rise Up on the 30th in the evening, to allow the students to actually pray with one another, to receive the Holy Spirit and to be filled with the Holy Spirit and to be stirred up in the Holy Spirit, so that they can actually go forth in a fruitful way, because it's really not us that does the work. We are collaborators with the Holy Spirit who goes first. So that was one of the first challenges that I gave, speaking out of St. John Paul II, was this call to be saints and to be like Saint Catherine, to be like the Canadian martyrs, to be like
for those Americans, that's the North American martyrs.
Oh yeah, sorry folks. I like to keep them for myself. So yeah, that's where my inspiration was to speak that to the students. And I mean, you were there in 2002, you were there in 2000, you were there in 1997 when John Paul II spoke beautiful words of be a saint. People resounded to that, right?
Yeah. It was like when he said it. He called I think there was 2.2 million people in 2002. That 2.2 in 2002. That he said, "Go and be the saints of the new millennium," and it was like all of us there felt like it was not only him, but it was actually God speaking to us, and everyone stood up and just shouted and said, "Yes, I want to be
That was at
that saint."
2000
Yeah, it
in
was in
Rome.
2000. It was in Rome. So really, what the voice we were hearing was, in a way, it was kind of like there was something very supernatural about it, very, very tangible. Like we kind of refer, the veil between heaven and earth was very thin, and that's the way it felt. But I that night when you spoke about the words of John Paul II, you be the builders. Talk a little bit about kind of where you first got that inspiration when we were in Rome, a month earlier.
Um, well, I later spoke on the quote from 2002 World Youth Day that I also felt like John Paul II was reminding me of when we were in Rome. So we did a mass at St. Peter's at his tomb, and it was just 3 weeks before Rise Up. So I just kind of naively asked if St. John Paul II had anything to say to CCO in Canada, and I felt his words, "You be those builders," came to mind very quickly, and so that wasn't like, what do those words mean? I knew exactly what those words meant. They were from his address, 2002. So if my phone will cooperate here to pull up the quote, he said, let me put on some glasses too. He said, "For such an undertaking, a new generation of builders is needed, moved not by fear or violence, but by the urgency of genuine love. They must learn to build, brick by brick, the city of God within the city of man. And allow me, dear young people, to consign this hope of mine to you. You must be those builders. You are the men and women of tomorrow. The future is in your hearts and in your hands. God is entrusting to you the task, at once difficult and uplifting, of working with Him in the building of the civilization of love." So this is a well-known quote in CCO because we prayed every day. We have a portion of this tucked into our Apostles' Prayer, which is what
Hmm.
this desire to be missionary to the world,
Hmm.
to build brick by brick the city of God inside of the city of man. And we know that those words aren't literal; they are in our words, one person at a time.
Hmm. Yeah, well, the whole brick by brick, building the city of God, brick by brick within the city of man. And I love what he said. I consign this hope to you. It's like he was saying, young people, but I just think all Catholics, I really put my hope in you that you would become those builders. Well, there was a sense when you spoke that night that I'm not being overly spiritual here, but it wasn't you speaking. It was actually him speaking through you. I think that's why people were so moved that day, that evening, is because when you spoke it, it resonated in our hearts. It's like, wow, this is like St. Paul, I mean St. John Paul II speaking to us and putting his hope, consigning his hope, asking us to do this. And I think that was why it's so powerful. And the invitation wasn't Angèle Renier, but it was like St. John Paul II saying, I'm still counting on you guys to fulfill this. And what was really moving, and from my vantage point, the 1,300 young people, they stood up after your presentation and they gave you a great standing ovation. It's almost like it was their yes. It was saying, yes, I want to be that builder. Like
Mhm.
I want to build the city of God within the city of man. It just really resonated in that crowd that day. But I would go as far to say I think that invitation to become builders is something that would resonate in the hearts and minds of any missionary disciple in the church. Meaning, that's why people are listening to this podcast, is because they're wanting to become missionary. And you know John Paul II is inviting us to be those builders, and we've got his intercession behind us. If we say yes, he'll intercede for us to kind of
Mhm.
fulfill that. So that was really, to me, powerful part of what you spoke. That what Again, it wasn't you so much, but it was him speaking through you. But you talked about some other things that evening also. The whole 2020, I really liked that.
Okay. I was like, what did I say?
Oh, you said a lot.
I don't know. It seemed really obvious to me, but it's the year 2020. And I was like, wow, we say you have 2020 vision, like maybe there's some advertisements people have seen around that use the word 2020 in that context. But I was just captured by it. And I was like, I'm wondering if this would be something I could use in my talk. So I just kind of looked up, what does 2020 vision mean? And the definition was very brief. And it just said sharpness and clarity of vision. And that resonated for me, for us in CCO, very quickly and easily, because we would speak of that often, this clear and simple focus in our proclamation of Jesus Christ, that we would clearly and simply, with sharpness and clarity, want to proclaim Jesus, and not just want to do it, but then do it in that sharpness and clarity. Sharp, not in an abrasive way, but just in a precise sort of way.
Well, I think that's really important, especially to all the participants of Rise Up that will be watching this podcast. You were given a challenge, and we all are given a challenge in the church to go out and to be those builders. But it's really important that we simplify. 2020 speaks of simplify it, clearly presented, and so we encourage you, to be missionary, but make your message be as clearly and present it as simply as possible so that the hearer can actually know what you're presenting and
Right.
respond appropriately. So yeah, the 2020 to me, I think, is an invitation for all those of us in mission, but especially those participants that Rise Up. Keep it simple, keep
Yeah.
it clear, and if you want to know how to do that, follow this podcast, because we're simple people here with a simple message. And so join us in becoming really 2020 this year. But you talked a little bit about going back too. Like,
Yeah. So I also thought of the expression hindsight's 2020.
yeah,
So I was like, like what's from the past? And I always go to the saints when it comes to the past. So I thought about John Paul II, and I thought about what was he seeing in the past. It's kind of a Back to the Future sort of like something going on, but what was he seeing back then about where we are now? And it brought to mind things that he said in the 90s as he was looking forward to the millennium, because that was a big focus of his,
yeah.
is bringing the church through the door of the new millennium. And he said things like, I see the dawning of an age of a new missionary age, and I see the horizons of humanity more open to the sowing of the gospel.
Okay, so you're saying that John Paul II, it's really important we don't just miss this, but St. John Paul II, we're embarking upon the new millennium. He said that he saw a missionary age in the church,
Right.
and that he saw a dawning of the horizon of a time where people be more open to the sowing of the gospel. As I kind of reflect on those two things, the missionary age, I can see a little bit of it, but the dawning of an age where people be more open to the sowing the gospel, it seems like that is exactly the opposite is happening today. People are more closed to the sowing of the gospel. They're rejecting on university campuses, in our parishes, in our families, that is kind of like people are just pushing back. So are you saying that maybe possibly that as we kind of embark upon this the year 2020, that we might be moving into that missionary age, that prophetic message of John Paul II is that he saw this age like a missionary age where we're not just maintaining the cultural Catholicism, but we're actually starting over in a way, and that people like Kanye West are going to be open to the sowing of the gospel in a different way. Is that kind of what you're hoping, that you're moving in that message?
If I said no, that'd be bad, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
no,
would
totally. I'm
be.
into it. No, I'm into it. But I think, those words sound really beautiful, like a new missionary age, but that actually says a lot. It means we need missionaries because it's that bad.
Yeah.
Like, if it was good, then we wouldn't need missionaries. We would just have programs or something. We would be doing maintenance. But it's a new missionary age, which means there is a lack of faith, and there is a need for people to be Christ and to proclaim Christ. And how can they hear unless someone proclaims, right?
Yeah.
We hear from Romans. So I think he's foreseeing an age that we're living in now when we're like, yeah, like people aren't coming to church, people aren't into it. There is a need for missionaries. But he didn't just say there's going to be an age where we need missionaries. He also said, humanity that's more open to the
Yeah.
sowing of the gospel. So if missionaries are sowing and there's a need to have mission, but people are open, then that means there's a lot of good that will be done. So I think we have to put all the pieces together and not just say like, wow, like this is the great apostasy and things are dark and it's
Hmm.
hard. Sure, but it's a missionary age and people are open. And so, I mean, we see that on campus, a hostile environment, the periphery for sure, people who are
Hmm.
generally uneducated in even what basic Christianity is. But when we can have the sit down conversation, there is a deep hunger and a readiness to be fed.
Yeah. Well, I think two things. I think that are important in light of what you just said. One is there people are open to the sowing of the gospel, but equally as important is that we have to be open and have the courage to actually speak. It's good to kind of be encouraged by the fact that people might be open, but people are going to continue to just be open until we actually have the courage to go and speak to them clearly and simply about Jesus. But something else that I'm just reminded of what St. John Paul II said, just before the year 2000. He says that when we cross over the threshold of the new millennium,
Mm-hmm.
that there would be a copious amount of grace upon the church in order to do the work of evangelization. So he prophesied or spoke prophetically that there would be a copious is a lot, more than we need probably, amount of grace, meaning not only would people be open, but he's actually suggesting that there's grace available to us right now. Those participants that rise up when you go out, you're going to actually be given more grace to do what you have to do. For those that are trying to reach their family or in their parish, that John Paul II spoke of this copious amount of grace being given to the church for the work of evangelization. So, to me, I think we have to be aware that there's something special happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, ordinary time. It's really, I would like to say, it's extraordinary time that we are moving into a missionary age, and that missionary age, like in the early church, is starting from ground zero, and we read in Acts, Acts 2, the new Pentecost, and they're given the courage and the graces and the gifts to go out and
Mm-hmm.
to bring back the 3,000, the 5,000, that were added those days. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's really, really important. Anything else you would like to say about your little presentation, that prophetic message on New Year's Eve?
I just made a statement that I think resonated with the crowd, that he spoke of crying out for like a new generation of builders. And I thought about the fact that he said this in 2002. And I was like, what of all those generations that are out there, like millennials, Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z, like, okay, what generation is of 2002? So I did some Googling, and it was the Gen Z people who were born 1995 and younger. And so I just said, like, who here would be a Gen Zer? And just said to them, like, well, what if, like, what if he's saying like that new generation of builders is the ones born, in this 2002 generational block kind of thing. And maybe you're that new generation that he was crying out for. I mean, a generation is always needed. We need proclaimers in every generation. But I was just hypothesizing, like, what if this is in a particular way that new generation that he had on his horizons? So I guess I just kind of threw it out there as I'm thinking about this, and the response of the crowd
Yeah, it
was
was amazing.
was unexpected.
Yeah, it
I didn't
was.
really know what would come of it. It was kind of just a idea in my mind, an inspiration. But when I spoke those words, and the words of "you be those builders," it's from my vantage point on the stage, it was like the room was rumbling. There was
Yeah.
something was moving
Yeah.
in the hearts of these young people, and audibly, like you could hear it. I audibly heard a rumble, and then the fact that they gave a standing ovation, just it's not to the power of my words, but it's the power of what was happening in their hearts
Exactly.
when they heard the weight of the words of St. John Paul II. It it all just came together in the power of the Holy Spirit. It was a moment that we lived at that Rise Up that isn't meant to be a rah-rah moment, but I hope um, maybe it was turning on engines of a car, like we're ready to go.
You know, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I've read, the Old Testament over and over again, especially the prophet Haggai, and around that, the rebuilding, the restoration of Jerusalem, like it lied in rubble. And in Haggai, they talked about how, they're building panel cities, houses around Jerusalem that lied, in destruction. And then the prophet Haggai came, and you read that he says these words, and they're very simple, clear words. He said, "God is with you," and it describes how the Spirit of the Lord came out of that prophetic message and moved in the hearts of the people, and they began in the power of the Holy Spirit to actually rebuild the Jerusalem very quickly. And it's almost kind of like your little message that you spoke that day. It actually was empowered by the Spirit, and it moved in people's hearts. But not only my prayer is, and let's all pray for this, is that not only are they moved, those young people, or you listening to this, are moved by the words of Angèle or the Holy Spirit, um, but we are moved to action to rebuild. Because one prophetic word, a lot of our prayer um, over Rise Up, which I think it goes beyond Rise Up, but it goes into this year, that we felt very strongly that there was something that the Holy Spirit was inviting us, and I believe inviting the church to really kind of unleash, to be kind of sent out into the world, like almost like a new Pentecost. And we all had that anticipation that Rise Up would do just that. And there's a couple things in there. I'm not going to put too much weight on it, but there's a couple things that someone was praying, and they saw kind of a cloud over the hotel, and they felt like that cloud was kind of the Holy Spirit coming and moving powerfully in Rise Up, and we felt He did. But another student shared with one of our staff that she had a similar, in her prayer, she had a similar sense of a cloud over her university, and she felt like that cloud was going to all the universities across Canada. So it was, caught our interest, that God was kind of doing something, and I don't know if it was or not, but what was really interesting is the day we left Toronto after Rise Up, um, the news, the blogs were all commenting over this cloud that was going over Toronto, and it was like this wave, this beautiful kind of unusual cloud over Toronto as we were leaving. And even, like I said, the news agencies and the people were commenting on social media about this. So it was really quite interesting. And so I just have a sense of hope that 2020 is going to be a very, very um, unique year for mission for us as disciples. That God is encouraging us, the saints are encouraging us to really go to the streets and to be those builders, brick by brick, one person at a time. Let's start taking back the land. Let's take back our universities. Let's take back our cities. Let's take back our families. Let's take back our countries, brick by brick. Let's build the city of God within the city of man. Now's the time. That's one thing that John Paul II said. He said, now, because people are open to the sowing of the gospel, we've got to direct all our energies to this moment. So thank you very much, Angèle, for sharing that with us. And we really encourage you, especially the participants of Rise Up, is take this challenge. The challenge, what the Lord spoke to you at Rise Up, really take it to heart and and do what you need to do to be those builders. Thank you very much, and feel free to come back to the podcast. Every Friday we send out a new episode, and we just want to invite you to be part of it. So thank you very much, and God bless.